Welcome to my Music Under the Lens series. The piece we will explore today is the famous Overture Coriolan op.62 by Ludwig van Beethoven. Enjoy! Overtures were symphonic pieces that were performed before the start of operas. It was with Beethoven that the overture became an independent piece. Later, other composers such as Mendelssohn, Brahms, Tchaikovsky followed the same example. Let's place this composition historically. We are in 1807. Beethoven has been living in Vienna for several years. A fellow citizen of his is a Viennese dramatist named Joseph Heinrich von Collin, who had written a tragedy entitled Coriolan. Inspired by this, Beethoven began to work on a composition for the tragedy. Some words about the historical figure of Coriolanus, whose existence, according to modern historiography, has been questioned and is therefore considered as a legendary character. We have accounts of him from the writings of Titus Livius and Plutarch. We are at the beginning of the era of the Roman Republic. Coriolanus, whose real name was Gaius Marcius, is said to be born in 527 BC. At the beginning of the 5th century BC, Rome was at war against the neighboring population of the Volsci. Gaius Marcius was appointed as general of the Roman army. He was a very rich person, very powerful, with a strong political influence and a very high social position. Nevertheless, he is a valiant general and definitively defeats the Volsci, receiving the name of Coriolanus because of his exceptional valor in a Roman siege of the Volscian city of Corioli. What happened next is rather complex. An internal political conflict caused Coriolanus to be exiled from Rome. Full of rage, Coriolanus makes a decision and chooses to take revenge, leading troops of the Volsci to besiege the Rome itself. We can read about these facts in the book Breviarium ab urbe condita, Abridgment of Roman History by Flavius Eutropius, a Roman historian who lived in the 4th century AD. He wrote, Quintius Marcius, the Roman general who had taken Corioli, the city of the Volsci, being compelled to flee from Rome, directed his course in resentment to the Volsci themselves, and received from them support against the Romans. He obtained several victories over the Romans. He made his way even to the 5th milestone from the city, and, refusing to hear a deputation that came to sue for peace, would have laid siege even to the place of his birth, had not his mother Veturia and his wife Volumnia gone out from the city to meet him, by whose tears and supplications he was prevailed on to withdraw his army. So Coriolanus decided not to attack Rome. The Volsci are not happy with that. According to some Roman historiographers, Coriolanus killed himself. According to others, the Volsci killed him. The figure of Coriolano did not interest only Collin. Long before, William Shakespeare also had written a tragedy called Coriolanus. Beethoven knew both tragedies. What is important is to note that in Shakespeare's tragedy especially, Coriolanus was not meant to be portrayed as a hero. Indeed, from historical sources, we know that Coriolanus in his political decisions was a very controversial figure. In the case of Shakespeare, attention is focused on the inner conflict which exists between passions within the human soul. How passions of pride, vanity, rage, and desire for revenge come into conflict with other passions of opposing nature, a positive nature, such as love for the mother, for one's wife and family, for the city where we were born and grew. However, such positive passions cannot prevail over destructive ones. The result is a great defeat. It was precisely this aspect concerning the tremendous inner conflict between passions that interested Shakespeare and Collin, and Beethoven as well, whose problem was how to find a musical solution that could musically express it. Let's see how he made it possible. Beethoven first chooses musical material on which to build his overture. He decides to start with a peremptory, decisive, brutal gesture. This one. This is a gesture of powerful energy. In order to achieve the effect, Beethoven makes violins, violas, cellos, and double basses play the same fortissimo long note, a C note, and then immediately follow it with a very short chord in fortissimo. A sort of terrible blow, followed by a terrifying silence. This gesture is immediately repeated 2 more times. We will not forget it. Let us hear now this initial gesture with its repetitions forming a complete unit. And yet Beethoven is not satisfied with this initial sonorial image, even if so striking. Therefore, immediately after that, he presents another type of gesture, more restrained and nervous at the same time, but now piano, while the previous one was fortissimo. This second gesture is an inner state of mind, an inward gesture as opposed to the initial one, which was outward. However, this second gesture still necessarily falls back into the brutality of the first gesture. In this page, I've drawn a red line which corresponds to the tormented rise and fall of this element, which reaches a climax and then, with a crescendo, returns to explode with a very strong and short chord. The silence that follows is of great dramatic power. What we have noticed up to this point will serve us as a compass to navigate this piece. Beethoven also uses a musical detail that runs throughout the overtures and gives great expressive strength and homogeneity to the whole piece. It is a very simple rhythmical cell made of a short note followed by a longer one, a pulse, like an extremely tormented heartbeat. If we pay attention, we can easily find it many times throughout the entire overture. All this brutality, this destructive conflict of passions, has lasted about 1 minute and 20 seconds so far. It is rather a considerable amount of time, but is very well thought out. So, after 1 minute and 20 seconds, the arrival of a tender melody has the effect of the light appearing whilst clouds dissolve. This overture proceeds by alternating these moments. a dichotomy of rising inward and outward impulses. We will hear again the initial fierce gesture, like a hand grabbing something and squeezing it until it explodes. We will hear again and again the short, long pulse. We will also meet again the tender moments brought by that cantabile melody. Then a crucial point arrives, a crescendo of extraordinary and astonishing dramatic power. Let's listen to it. This gesture of ferocity, hatred, and revenge has devastated everything, but it leads to defeat. Right at this moment begins the coda of this overture. The material is becoming more and more rarefied. Life begins to fade away. 3 clear pizzicato strokes by the string evoke the end of everything. There is a very interesting aspect that we can observe in the Beethoven manuscript of this overture. What I'm showing you now are the pages corresponding to that crescendo we have just heard, a sort of climax after which the piece fades out and Coriolan's life comes to end. Look at how many corrections there are. Observing such tormented handwriting, we deduce that composing was for Beethoven a titanic undertaking, a painful struggle. We know Beethoven was inspired by the figure of Coriolanus from Collins' tragedy, and maybe even more from Shakespeare's one. Nevertheless, listening to his music, knowing about his life, and also observing his manuscript, we may also imagine that, through composing, Beethoven is writing about himself. So, we have come to the end of our musical journey through this Coriolan Overture. As I usually do, in the box here below, I have listed a few links to some performances that I would recommend. I thank you all very much, and I would like to remind you of the other videos of my Music Under the Lens series. I also invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button here below the video. Many thanks and see you soon.